Hello, my name is Rocky, and I have to unburden myself by sharing something I've kept hidden for far too long. Before you form an opinion about me, I hope you'll take a moment to listen to my story. I never imagined I'd be in a situation like this, and even now, I struggle to comprehend how everything fell apart so quickly. It's a memory that has stayed with me, haunting me day and night. Something my husband John pushed me into, a decision that changed my life in ways I couldn't have foreseen. It all began a few years ago. John and I had been together for nearly a decade. Our marriage, like any other, had its challenges, but I believed we were solid. John was always caring and thoughtful, at least that's how he used to be. But over time, he began to change. He grew distant, more demanding, and emotionally detached. The warmth that once defined our relationship started to fade. I tried to justify it to myself, thinking it might just be stress from work or life weighing him down. But deep in my heart, I knew there was more to it. Something wasn't right. One evening, John came home from work, radiating a strange energy. He seemed unusually cheerful, but there was something in his demeanor that put me on edge. His gaze lingered on me in a way that felt off, like he was calculating something. We had dinner, as we normally did, but just as I began to clear the plates, he stopped me. "Rocky, can you sit for a moment?" he said, his voice unusually firm. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. The look on his face told me this wasn't going to be a casual chat. "I've been doing some thinking," he began, his eyes shifting away from mine. "And there's something I need to talk to you about." I nodded cautiously, unsure of what was coming. Then he said something that left me stunned. "Our relationship has become routine," he admitted. "I've been feeling restless, and I think it's time we shake things up a bit." At first, I thought he might suggest a vacation or maybe a date night to rekindle the spark in our marriage, but what he said next blindsided me. "I've arranged for us to meet 2 men," he said flatly. "They'll be coming over this weekend." For a moment, I couldn't believe my ears. My mind raced, trying to piece together what he was saying. Was this a joke? A misunderstanding? But the unyielding expression on his face told me otherwise. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're friends of mine," he explained, his tone disturbingly casual. "We'll spend the night with them, together." A chill ran down my spine. My hands began to shake as I tried to process the words coming out of his mouth. This wasn't the John I thought I knew. The idea of inviting strangers into our home, into our marriage, felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. "John, have you lost your mind?" I finally blurted out, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "This isn't who we are. How could you even suggest something like this?" But before I could say anything more, he interrupted me. "Rocky, this is happening," he said firmly, his voice cold and unrelenting. "You need to understand, it's what I want, and it's what our relationship needs." His words left me speechless. How could he be so blind to what this would do to us, to me? It felt like the foundation of our marriage was crumbling beneath my feet. "No," I said at last, my voice shaking but resolute. "I can't. I won't." I believed that would be the end of it, that he would come to his senses and drop this insane idea. But I was wrong. Over the next few days, John became even more distant. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was only to bring up his plan. He started coming home later and later, brushing off my questions with vague excuses. The tension between us grew unbearable, and I felt like I was losing the man I once loved. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would leave me questioning everything. The love that once filled our home had been replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with the tension that had built between us. I felt trapped, alone, and utterly confused. How had it come to this? How had our marriage fallen so far? By Friday, the dread was unbearable, settling deep in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. John was adamant. The meeting was happening whether I agreed or not. I thought about leaving, about packing a bag and walking out the door without looking back. But I couldn't. As much as I hated to admit it, part of me was still clinging to the man I once loved. I kept hoping this was just a phase, a storm we could weather together. I wasn't ready to give up on the life we had built. But at the same time, the thought of going through with John's plan felt impossible. Saturday evening arrived far too quickly. The men, John's so-called friends, showed up at exactly 8 p.m. I sat stiffly on the couch, my hands clenched together in my lap, trying desperately to hold back tears. I didn't even know their names, yet there they were, sitting in my living room, chatting with my husband like old friends. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. I wanted nothing more than to disappear, to get up and run out of the house and never look back, but then John leaned over, his hand resting firmly on my knee. "Rocky, it's time," he whispered. I froze. My mind screamed at me to stand up and leave, but my body wouldn't cooperate. His hand on my knee felt like an anchor, holding me in place. I couldn't bring myself to look at him, let alone at the two men sitting across the room. My heart pounded in my chest, and the walls seemed to close in around me. "Rocky, please," John said again, his voice softer this time, almost pleading. There was something in his tone that made me pause. It wasn't just insistence, it was desperation. For the first time in days, I caught a glimpse of vulnerability in his eyes. This wasn't just about some twisted fantasy, it was about something deeper. Control, power, or perhaps a need he couldn't articulate. But understanding that didn't make it right. None of this felt right. "I can't do this, John," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. "This isn't who we are." He sighed heavily and leaned back, rubbing his temples in frustration. "You think I want this?" he muttered, almost as if he was talking to himself. "I'm doing this for us, Rachel. Don't you see that?" "No, you're not," I shot back, finding a fragment of strength I didn't know I had. "You're doing this for you. You've changed, John. This isn't about us anymore. It's about control." For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. Instead, he clenched his jaw and stood up, pacing the room like a man who didn't know which way to turn. I wanted to reach out to him, to pull him back from the edge and remind him of the man he used to be. But we were so far from where we had started, and I didn't know if we could ever find our way back. The silence stretched unbearably between us until one of the men, let's call him Marcus, cleared his throat. His voice was calm but firm as he broke the tension. "Look," Marcus said, his tone measured, "if this isn't happening, we should probably leave." For the first time, I really looked at him. He wasn't what I had imagined. He seemed calm, even respectful, and his demeanor carried a strange air of understanding. I had built up this image in my mind that these men would be predators, but they weren't. They were just people. Somehow that realization made the entire situation even more confusing. I didn't want to stay. I didn't want to be a part of whatever this was becoming. But the weight of everything, the years I had spent with John, the love we once shared, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other, kept me rooted in that spot, unable to move. I didn't know what to do. It felt as though I was suffocating, trapped in the web of my own indecision. The air in the room was heavy, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Then John's voice broke through the silence, quiet but resolute. "If you leave, we're done." His words struck me like a physical blow, leaving me momentarily breathless. I stared at him in disbelief, struggling to process what he had just said. He had drawn a line in the sand, forcing me to make a choice I wasn't ready for. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away, refusing to let him see me crumble. "I've given you everything," John continued, his tone steady yet icy. "I've provided for you, loved you, and this one thing is all I'm asking for in return." I stood up, my legs trembling beneath me, but fueled by a newfound determination. My voice barely rose above a whisper, but I managed to say, "This isn't love, John. This is manipulation." His eyes darkened with anger, but I no longer cared. I couldn't do this. I wouldn't. Turning toward the door, I braced myself for him to yell, to grab me, to try and stop me. But he didn't. Instead, I heard him mutter under his breath something like, "You'll regret this." Maybe he was right. Maybe leaving was a mistake. But in that moment, I knew I had to walk away. I couldn't let John, or anyone else, push me into something that went against everything I believed in. Stepping outside, the cool evening air brushed against my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Relief and heartbreak swirled together in a strange, dizzying mix as I walked down the street, unsure where I was headed or what I would do next. My mind raced,